My name is Elise, and I'm 26 years old. I grew up in a small, weathered house in a quiet suburb of Raleigh, North Carolina, with my parents, Richard and Margaret, and my younger brother, Caleb, who's now 19 years old. For nearly a decade, I poured my heart and soul into keeping our family afloat, paying the mortgage, covering utilities, and settling my parents' debts while they leaned on me without a word of thanks. But on my 26th birthday, during a dinner that was supposed to celebrate me, my father dropped a bombshell that turned my world upside down. He looked me in the eye and said I was cut out of the family's inheritance, every penny, every piece of property, gone. That moment wasn't just a betrayal. It was the spark that ignited my fight to reclaim what was mine. This is the story of how I uncovered my parents' sinister plan to rob me and how I turned the tables, leaving them to face the consequences of their greed. The evening of my 26th birthday was warm and sticky, the kind of June night where the air feels heavy with secrets. I came home from my job as an accountant, my blazer wrinkled from a long day, the faint smell of office coffee still lingering on my sleeves. The dining room was half-heartedly decorated, a store-bought chocolate cake sat on the table, its candles unlit, and a few limp balloons were taped to the wall, already sagging. My mother was slicing a roast chicken, her movements slow and mechanical, as if she were distracted by something she wouldn't share. My father sat at the head of the table, nursing a glass of whiskey, his eyes fixed on the flickering chandelier. Caleb, my sweet, quiet brother, was setting out plates, offering me a small smile as I walked in. I thought, maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. Maybe they'd see me, really see me, for all I'd done. I was wrong. We sat down, and the meal began in a tense, familiar silence. The only sounds were the clink of forks, the scrape of knives, and the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower. I was about to cut into my chicken when my father slammed his glass down, the sharp sound making me flinch. "Elise," he said, his voice low and cold, "we've made a decision. You're not getting any part of the family inheritance. The house, the savings, the land your grandparents left us, it's all going to Caleb and your cousin, Derek. You've had your chance to prove your worth, and you've fallen short." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My fork slipped from my hand, clattering onto the plate. The room seemed to shrink, the air too thick to breathe. My mother avoided my gaze, fussing with her napkin as if it could shield her from the moment. Caleb's eyes widened, his mouth half open in shock. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You heard me," my father said, leaning back in his chair, his expression hard. "You're an adult. You don't need us. Derek's starting a family, and Caleb's the future of this house. It's done." Caleb shook his head, his voice trembling with anger. "This is crazy, Dad. Elise pays for everything, the mortgage, the electric, the groceries. How can you say she's not worth it?" My father's glare silenced him. "Stay out of this, Caleb. This is my house, my rules." My mother finally spoke, her voice soft and shaky. "It's for the best, Elise. You'll understand someday." I looked from her to my father, searching for a hint of regret, but there was none. After years of carrying this family on my back, they were tossing me aside like I was nothing. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to stay steady. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. Instead, I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "If that's your decision," I said, my voice calmer than I felt, "then I have one, too. You'll see what it means to cut me out." I carried my plate to the sink, the clatter of ceramic echoing in the silent room. Caleb's eyes followed me, full of worry, but I gave him a small nod before heading upstairs. As I closed my bedroom door, I felt a strange clarity. This wasn't just about the inheritance. Something deeper, something darker, was at play, and I was going to find out what it was. To understand why this hurt so much, I need to take you back. When I was 17, my father lost his job as a car salesman during a brutal recession. The dealership closed, and he never quite recovered. My mother, a part-time florist at a local shop, made barely enough to cover her own expenses. By the time I was 18, the bank was sending foreclosure notices, and our mailbox was stuffed with overdue bills, electricity, water, credit cards. My parents were drowning, and they turned to me, their only daughter, to save them. I'd just been accepted to college, dreaming of studying economics, but those dreams were put on hold. I dropped out before my first semester and took a full-time job at an accounting firm, working 40 hours a week while picking up night shifts at a diner to make ends meet. Every paycheck went to the family. I paid the mortgage to keep the bank at bay, covered the utilities so we wouldn't sit in the dark, and even settled my father's medical bills after a minor heart scare when I was 20. I remember the sleepless nights, the way my hands shook as I balanced their checkbook, the way my stomach knotted when I realized there was nothing left for me. But I did it because they were my family. I thought we were a team, that my sacrifices meant something. Caleb, who was only 11 when it started, saw it all. He'd slip me drawings or leave post-it notes on my desk saying, "You're my hero, Elise." Those little gestures kept me going, even when my parents didn't. My father, though, grew bitter over the years. He'd spend hours in his recliner, muttering about how the world had cheated him. He'd snap at me if I was late with a payment, saying, "You're not doing anything special, Elise. It's your duty." My mother was quieter, but her silence stung just as much. She'd ask for a little help with the car payment or the phone bill, never acknowledging that I was already carrying everything. I told myself they were stressed, that they didn't mean it. But there were signs I should have noticed sooner. About 6 months before my birthday, my father started talking about Derek, our cousin who lived an hour away. Derek was 30, a charming drifter who'd never held a job for more than a year. He'd show up unannounced, all smiles, spinning stories about his big plans. My father ate it up, calling him a real go-getter. I found it odd, Derek rarely visited growing up, and now he was suddenly family. My mother, too, was acting strange. She'd lock her laptop whenever I entered the room, something she'd never done before. Once, I overheard them whispering in the kitchen about the paperwork and making sure Elise doesn't find out. I thought maybe they were planning a surprise, like paying me back for the bills. I was naive. The morning after my birthday, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My father's words, "you've fallen short," echoed in my head, cutting deeper each time. Why Derek? Why now? I waited until my parents left for what they called a quick errand, leaving Caleb at home. He was in the living room, scrolling on his phone, but he looked up when I sat beside him. "Caleb," I said quietly, "do you know anything about Dad's plans for the inheritance?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not really, but they've been weird lately. Dad keeps talking about Derek like he's the golden child. It's creepy." That was all I needed to hear. I borrowed Caleb's key to my parents' study, a small room they kept locked most of the time. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and dust. My father's desk was cluttered with receipts and empty coffee mugs, but I zeroed in on a locked drawer. I'd seen him hide the key behind a family photo frame once, and sure enough, it was there, cold against my fingers. My heart pounded as I opened the drawer. Inside was a thick folder labeled estate plan. I sat on the floor, flipping through it, and felt my stomach twist. It was a draft of a new will, dated 3 weeks earlier. The house, a savings account with $50,000, and a small plot of land my grandparents had left us were all to be split between Caleb and Derek. My name wasn't mentioned once. Then I found something worse, a printed email from my father to a lawyer named Mr. Grayson. It read, "Elise doesn't need to know until it's done. She's been living here rent-free, so she has no claim. Derek will put the assets to good use, and Caleb's too young to object. Let's finalize this before July." Rent-free? I'd paid over $200,000 in mortgage payments, utilities, and debt since I was 18. I wasn't a tenant, I was the reason we still had a home. My hands shook as I read on. Another email, this one to Derek, promised him a big cut if he kept quiet. I felt like I'd been stabbed in the back, not just by my parents, but by a cousin I barely knew. I sat there, the papers scattered around me, my breath coming in short gasps. For a moment, I wanted to march downstairs and confront them, to scream until they admitted what they'd done. But I knew my father would dismiss me, and my mother would cry and play the victim. I needed to be smarter. I took photos of every document with my phone, emailed them to myself, and carefully put everything back. Then I called my friend Sarah, a paralegal who'd helped me with tax paperwork before. "Sarah," I said, my voice trembling, "my parents are trying to steal my inheritance. I need you." She didn't hesitate. "Come over tonight. Bring everything you have." At Sarah's apartment, I spread the photos on her kitchen table. Her eyes narrowed as she read the emails and will. "Elise, this is disgusting," she said. "They're not just cutting you out, they're lying about your contributions to make it seem fair. You've been paying the mortgage, which could give you a legal claim to the house under North Carolina law." She explained that my financial support might qualify as an equitable interest in the property, especially since I'd been the primary breadwinner for years. "But we need more evidence," she said. "Bank statements, payment records, texts, anything showing you've been the one keeping this family afloat." Over the next 2 weeks, I turned into a detective in my own life. I dug through my bank account, pulling statements that showed every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every credit card charge I'd covered for my parents. I found old text messages from my mother, casual requests like, "Elise, can you handle the water bill this month? We're a bit short, or the car needs new tires, can you chip in?" Each one was a reminder of how they'd leaned on me without gratitude. Caleb helped, too. He'd wait until my parents were asleep, then sneak onto their laptop to check their emails. One night, he sent me a screenshot of an email from my father to Derek. "Once Elise is out of the picture, we'll sell the house and land. You'll get 60%. Keep your mouth shut." Caleb texted, "I'm so sorry, Elise. I had no idea they were this bad." The emails revealed the full scope of their plan. Derek had pitched my father on a real estate investment that promised huge returns but sounded like a scam. My father, desperate to reclaim his pride after years of unemployment, saw Derek as his savior. The plan was to sell the house and land, give Derek the lion's share to fund his scheme, and leave Caleb with a small trust fund he couldn't touch until he was 25. I was the problem. They knew I'd never agreed to sell the house I'd fought to keep. By cutting me out, they thought they could silence me. Sarah connected me with a lawyer, Ms. Torres, who specialized in estate disputes. I met her at her office, a small space filled with law books and the faint smell of lavender. I showed her the documents, the bank statements, the emails. She leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. "Elise, your parents are acting like you're a guest in their house, not the person who's kept it standing. You have a strong case for equitable distribution, but we need to move fast before they finalize the will." She suggested a bold strategy: confront my parents in front of witnesses, present the evidence, and demand they revise the will. If they refused, we'd file a lawsuit. "You've got one more advantage," she said, pointing to a mortgage statement. "The house is in your name. You can block any sale." I'd forgotten that detail. Years ago, when we refinanced the mortgage, my parents' credit was too poor, so I'd taken it out in my name. It was a technicality I'd never thought to use, but now it was my trump card. I decided to organize a family meeting, inviting my parents, Caleb, Derek, and my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, who'd always been fair and level-headed. I asked Ms. Torres to attend as a neutral observer, her presence a quiet warning. The meeting was set for 2 weeks after my birthday, and I spent every day preparing, rehearsing what I'd say, steeling myself for the fight. The day of the meeting, the living room felt like a courtroom. My parents sat on the couch, assuming it was just a casual talk about family plans. Derek slouched in an armchair, flashing his usual cocky grin. Aunt Linda sat near the window, her hands folded, her eyes sharp with curiosity. Caleb was next to me, his knee bouncing nervously. Ms. Torres stood by the door, her briefcase at her side. I stood up, holding a folder thick with evidence, and took a deep breath. I've been paying for this house since I was 18, I said, my voice steady. The mortgage, the utilities, the debts, I've covered it all. But I found out you're planning to give everything to Derek and Caleb, leaving me with nothing. I want to know why. My father laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made my skin crawl. You're blowing this out of proportion, Elise. This is our house, and we decide what happens to it. My mother nodded, her voice barely audible. We're just planning for the future, honey. I opened the folder and held up the email to Mr. Grayson. Then explain this, I said. You told your lawyer I've been living here rent-free, that I have no claim. But these bank statements show I've paid $250,000 in mortgage payments, utilities, and bills. This house is as much mine as it is yours. The room went deathly quiet. Derek's grin vanished, and he shifted in his seat. Aunt Linda leaned forward, her voice cutting through the silence. Richard, is this true? My father's face flushed, his hands clenching into fists. She's lying. She's just a kid who lives here. I didn't back down. I passed out copies of the will draft, the emails, and my payment records. I'm not a kid, I said. I'm the reason we didn't lose this house years ago. And I know about your deal with Derek. You're planning to sell the house and land for his real estate scam. My mother gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Derek jumped up, his voice loud and defensive. You're making this up. I'm just helping the family. But Ms. Torres stepped forward, her tone calm but authoritative. I've reviewed Elise's evidence. She has a legal claim to this property based on her financial contributions. If you proceed with this will, we'll file a lawsuit, and the court will likely rule in her favor. Aunt Linda turned to my parents, her expression a mix of shock and disgust. How could you do this to your own daughter? My father's composure shattered. He stood, his voice booming. You ungrateful brat! After everything we've done for you. He took a step toward me, his face twisted with rage, but Caleb was faster. He jumped between us, his voice firm. Don't you dare touch her, Dad. Aunt Linda stood, too, her tone icy. Richard, sit down. You're making a fool of yourself. The room crackled with tension, every eye on my father. I held my ground, my heart pounding but my resolve unbreakable. I'm giving you one chance to fix this, I said. Revise the will to include me, or I'll stop the sale of this house. The mortgage is in my name, and I can block any transfer. My father froze, his eyes widening. He'd forgotten about the mortgage, and the realization hit him like a brick. My mother started sobbing, her hands covering her face. Derek stormed out, muttering about disloyalty. Ms. Torres nodded at me, a silent approval. The meeting ended with my parents agreeing to meet Ms. Torres the next day to revise the will, their defiance crumbling under the weight of the evidence. Aunt Linda pulled me aside as we left, her voice soft. I'm so proud of you, Elise. You stood up for what's right. The next day, my parents signed a new will, splitting the inheritance equally between Caleb and me. Derek was cut out entirely, his real estate deal exposed as a fraud by Ms. Torres's investigation. But the victory didn't feel like a win. I'd fought for my place in this family, only to realize I didn't want it anymore. The house, once a symbol of my sacrifices, now felt like a prison. I packed a suitcase and moved in with Sarah, promising myself I'd find my own place soon. Caleb stayed behind, finishing his first year of college, but we texted constantly, his messages a lifeline. I'm so sorry you had to go through this, he wrote one night. But you're the strongest person I know. I thought the confrontation would be the end, but my father's anger only grew. 3 weeks later, he showed up at Sarah's apartment at midnight, pounding on the door and shouting, Elise, you think you can humiliate me? You'll regret this. His voice was slurred, and I could smell whiskey through the door. Sarah, wide-eyed, grabbed her phone and called 911. I watched through the peephole as he hammered the door, his face red with rage. "You're my daughter. I have a right to you," he yelled. My stomach churned, but I stayed calm, whispering to Sarah, "The police are coming. We're safe." Minutes later, sirens pierced the night. 2 officers climbed the stairs, their flashlights cutting through the dark. "Sir, step away from the door," one said, his voice firm. My father turned, still shouting. "She's my daughter. I can talk to her." The officer didn't budge. "You're trespassing and threatening her. You need to leave, or we'll arrest you." My father lunged forward, as if to push past them, but the officers were faster. They restrained him, his wrists clicking into handcuffs as he cursed and struggled. I opened the door just enough to meet the officer's eyes. "Thank you," I said quietly. They led my father away, his shouts fading down the hall. I thought that would be the last of it, but my parents weren't done. A week later, Caleb called me in a panic. "Elise, Mom's trying to get into your bank account. I saw her with your old checkbook, the one you gave her for emergencies." My heart sank. Years ago, I'd added my mother to a secondary account for household expenses, but I'd forgotten to remove her. I logged in and saw 5 failed login attempts, followed by a password reset request. I immediately changed the password, enabled 2-factor authentication, and called my bank to block her access. Caleb sent me a photo of the checkbook, its edges worn from years of use. "I'm so sorry," he texted. "I didn't know she kept it." I replied, "It's not your fault. I'll handle it." I contacted Ms. Torres, who helped me file a temporary restraining order against my parents. The process was grueling, hours of paperwork, a court hearing where I had to recount every betrayal. But the judge was sympathetic, granting the order after reviewing the police report from my father's outburst and the bank alerts. My parents were barred from contacting me or accessing my accounts. I felt a weight lift, but also a deep sadness. I hadn't wanted to erase my family, but they'd left me no choice. Caleb's life in that house became harder. My father turned his anger on him, accusing him of betraying the family for supporting me. My mother played the victim, weeping about how I'd abandoned them. Caleb stayed strong, working part-time at a bookstore and saving every dollar for his escape. I sent him money when I could, and we made a pact: when he turned 20, he'd move out, and I'd help him start over. "Just hold on," I told him during one late-night call. "You're almost there." He laughed, a tired but hopeful sound. "I'm trying, Elise. I want to be like you." 2 months later, my parents tried one last desperate move. Caleb texted me during my lunch break, "Elise, Dad's been on the phone with Derek. They're talking about selling the land behind your back." I called Ms. Torres immediately, who confirmed that the land, still in my parents' name, was listed for sale. But because I'd alerted her, she filed an injunction, citing my financial contributions to the estate. The sale was halted, and the buyer backed out when they learned about the legal dispute. My parents were furious, but powerless. The land remained unsold, a reminder of their failed scheme. 6 months after the confrontation, Aunt Linda called with an update. "Elise, your parents are in deep trouble," she said. "They're behind on every bill, and the bank's threatening to foreclose on the house again. They tried to borrow money from Derek, but he's disappeared, probably with whatever cash they gave him." I listened, my heart heavy but unsurprised. "Thanks for telling me," I said. "But I can't save them anymore." Aunt Linda sighed. "I know, honey. You did more than enough." A year later, Caleb turned 20. I drove to the house to pick him up, my hands tight on the steering wheel as I pulled into the driveway. The house looked like a ghost of itself, paint peeling, grass overgrown, a for sale sign stabbed into the dirt. Caleb was waiting on the porch, a duffel bag at his feet, his face tired but resolute. He didn't glance back as we loaded his things into my car. "You good?" I asked, my voice soft. He nodded, a faint smile breaking through. Better than I've been in years. Let's get out of here. We drove to my new apartment, a sunny one-bedroom I'd rented near my office. I'd set up a pull-out couch for Caleb, complete with a stack of his favorite sci-fi books. That night, we ordered pizza and sat on the floor, laughing about old memories, the time we snuck cookies from the kitchen at midnight, the summer we built a terrible treehouse in the backyard. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a family again, not because of blood, but because of love. Caleb enrolled in community college, studying environmental science, a passion he'd buried under our parents' expectations. I kept working as an accountant but started a side hustle offering financial consulting, a small dream I was finally chasing. My parents' lives fell apart without me. The bank foreclosed on the house, and they moved into a rundown apartment on the outskirts of Raleigh. Aunt Linda told me they'd tried to reach me through cousins and old neighbors, sending messages about rebuilding bridges. I didn't reply. I'd given them 8 years of my life, and they'd repaid me with lies and greed. I had nothing left to give. 2 years after I walked away, Caleb and I sat on a park bench by a lake, the sunset painting the water gold. He'd just won a scholarship for his college program, and I'd signed my first big consulting client. Elise, he said, turning to me, I used to think family meant sticking together no matter what. But you showed me it's about who lifts you up, who sees you. I'm so glad we're in this together. I squeezed his hand, tears welling in my eyes. Me too, Caleb. We're enough. Looking back, I see that leaving was the hardest choice I ever made, but also the most liberating. I learned that family isn't about who shares your blood, it's about who shares your heart. I learned that my worth isn't measured by what I sacrifice, but by what I choose to build for myself. And I learned that sometimes, to find peace, you have to walk away from the people who hurt you most, even if they're the ones who raised you. My parents thought they could erase me, but I rewrote my story. And I'm never letting anyone take that pen from me again. So, what do you think? Have you ever had to fight for your place in your family? Maybe you faced a betrayal that forced you to choose yourself. Share your stories in the comments, I'd love to read them. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of courage and redemption. Thanks for being here.